Hi students, this week we're talking about the period in American history called A Nation Divided, basically the period from the mid-1840s up until the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. It's a period during which the United States has established itself as a powerful country across North America, but a powerful country that is divided over a number of important issues. The issue of slavery and the role of the federal government. For one half of the country, or one part of the country, the fact that slavery is permitted in the United States is seen as a problem that needs to be eradicated. For another part of the country, the idea that the federal government would seek to force these states to abolish slavery is seen as an abuse of government power. And so in this video, I'm going to look at the history of American opposition to slavery. And we find its very early beginnings around 1806 into 1815 with the American Colonization Society. And this was a program for free blacks, so not slaves, free blacks, to be returned to Africa, to raise money for free blacks to return to Africa. And this society was successful in purchasing territory in Africa, and in the end sending about 15,000 free African Americans back to Africa to found what today is the country of Liberia. But there were many blacks who were opposed to this, who said that sending free blacks to Africa isn't doing anything about slavery, and is that the United States is their home too. So there was opposition to this within the African American community. But this is kind of the beginnings of an understanding of that there's something wrong with the way African Americans are being treated in the United States. And that sense grows in the 18 teens and especially during the 1820s, a period during which slavery became illegal in all the northern states, and in which Great Britain banned the slave trade, and which the movement for the abolition of slavery in Britain gained a lot of very prominent supporters. And these supporters would come on speaking tours in the northern states, emphasize the evil of slavery in the southern states. And this was combined with the Second Great Awakening. Remember that I said that the Second Great Awakening gives rise to a whole host of movements that are designed to help reform the United States. And one of those is the abolition movement, a movement towards total abolition of slavery. And this is a distinction within the anti-slavery movements. Prior to the Second Great Awakening, most people who were opposed to most people who were opposed to slavery, their approach was what's known as a gradualist approach. That they would ban slavery in any future states, any future territories that became states of the Union, and then through pressure, gradually the southern states would get rid of slavery as well. What changes during the 1820s, and especially as you get into the 1830s, is there's a new pressure just to abolish slavery, that this institution is such a great evil that it needs to be rooted out immediately. The leaders of this movement or the great leader, the great initiator, is a man named William Lloyd Garrison, a printer who founds the first anti-slavery newspaper called The Liberator, in which he condemned this gradualist approach to removing slavery. He said, no, slavery is an evil that has to be recognized, that has to be acknowledged, and that has to be ended now. It's a great stain on the American Republic. Nevertheless, Garrison saw it as so fundamentally dishonoring to the United States that he actually refused to be part of the American political system. He refused to vote. He hoped simply through shame and through peer pressure to force the South into abolishing slavery. Others took a more politically direct route. They did not see so much that the whole idea of the United States was a problem or was a failure because of the existence of slavery. They saw the United States as a good thing, as a good idea, a good country that embraced good principles, but that these principles needed to be properly applied. And therefore, they founded the Liberty Party, the first specifically anti-slavery party. And by the time we get into the 1840s, anti-slavery movements, the Liberty Party, all of these are starting to draw increasing interest. There are also African Americans who provide vital support to raising awareness in the North of the evils of slavery. Someone like Frederick Douglass, for example, who's very famous, became one of the most famous men in the United States at the time, a slave who escaped to the North and who wrote his autobiography, which became a bestseller, and founded a newspaper which he named the North Star, the star that slaves who were trying to escape from slavery would try and follow to freedom. And there were other slaves or those who had escaped from slavery and become free, who supported this movement as well, and they followed a similar course of action. They would learn how to read and write. They would write their autobiography. They would go on speaking tours, raising awareness of the evils of slavery. And of course, this was not without its risks. William Lloyd Garrison was considered very unpopular, even in Boston, where you're a long way removed from slavery. He was dragged through the streets and beaten up by a mob because of his opposition to slavery. Elijah Lovejoy was a preacher who moved to St. Louis, Missouri. He preached both against Catholicism but also against slavery. And he, in a scuffle with his printing press, where he's trying to print publications that explain the problems of slavery, he also is beaten up and actually killed, and he becomes a martyr for the abolitionist movement. And we also see that the abolitionist movement is moving forward to more direct action and more direct influence in the contest against slavery. For example, we see the creation of the Underground Railway, an effort to establish a network of safe houses that would help slaves who were trying to escape from slavery reach their freedom. And one of the most famous operatives on the Underground Railway, Harriet Tubman, who's now been placed on some of the currency of the United States, was a former slave who escaped and then who went back to help other slaves to escape afterwards. So during this period, 1820s, 30s, and 40s, we see the rise of the abolitionist movement, growing opposition to slavery in the northern states, and this is going to come to a head as the United States continues to expand after the Mexican-American War.